Society for this opportunity to make this presentation. My name is Mubanga Bwalya, and I'm going to present on an audit that we did, a clinical audit at St. Francis Hospital. Just to, first of all, recognize the contributors to this project. As you know, most of these projects, you will never do them as an individual. So I just want to recognize the contributions from a colleague of mine from St. Francis Hospital, Ndanji, Ivy Kasa, Dr. Njo Mvula, John, also from St. Francis Hospital, is an ophthalmologist, eye services. Then, of course, most of us are, we know Dr. Wanga Oswald from Midland University Hospital, Salamo. Then also not forgetting Dr. Mutanje from Illinois College at the School of Health Sciences, and also another colleague of mine from St. Francis Hospital, Bretila Montanga. So basically our presentation outline is as can be seen. We'll just have a brief look at, have a background to St. Francis. Sometimes it's good to have a context or a background to the presentation, and I thought that just to briefly understand St. Francis Hospital would help, even as we look at this audit that we did at St. Francis Hospital. From there, we'll briefly look at medical imaging in healthcare, the role of medical imaging in healthcare. Sometimes this role is misunderstood, but this, as it adds to the background, it will help us to have a better perspective to this issue of clinical auditing and specifically what was done under medical imaging at St. Francis Hospital. From there, we'll look at a radiology request form. What is it? How does it look like? And really, how does it come into this audit? Because we realized it was the focus of the study. We'll look at what is an audit and see what is a clinical audit, just to help us understand. Then from there, we'll jump into the actual audit that we did at St. Francis Hospital, how we did it, and so on and so forth. So that we also, after that, look at we discuss the findings, very important, so that we see what do these findings mean, and then we'll have the conclusion and recommendation. So St. Francis Hospital basically is a second level hospital, and we provide basically all the services that are expected of a second level hospital. So we have the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, we have pediatrics, internal medicine, eye services. We also have, for example, lab services, physiotherapy, and so on and so forth, just to name a few. Our imaging department offers both X-ray imaging services and ultrasound services. So we do, under X-ray services, we do both screen film radiography and computed radiography. So under that, we offer plain X-ray imaging, contrast studies, and under contrast studies, what we are looking at are barium studies, intravenous urographies, and hysterosalpingography. So under ultrasound, basically, we do all those that you would expect at a second level hospital. So I'm not going to focus so much on explaining on this issue. So medical imaging, I think it's important to understand that it's very crucial and it is essential in the preliminary diagnosis of diseases and injuries, but also very important in the monitoring of patient treatment. So from the medical imaging point of view, we need to understand that there are two key players that are involved. We have the radiographers or plus radiograph technologists and the radiologists that are the main professionals in most cases that you find in this department. Of course, we may have nurses that are there, also play their part, but I think for the purpose of this presentation, we may just limit ourselves to radiographers and radiologists, because these are the ones that receive these requests from our clinicians. So once the clinicians require an investigation to be done, they'll fill in a form, and a request for investigations, be it in general radiography, computed aided imaging, contrast aided examinations, be it ultrasound, mammography, CT, and so on and so forth. So the relationship here usually is that the clinician requests, and then this request form has to reach the department and has to communicate what the clinician requires. So radiology request form is a tool-based study that is used by clinicians, to refer patients for medical imaging investigation. And it's a legal document. It requires to be fully completed, I think, as we will see even as we go on with our presentation. So there are so many aspects to it. There are issues of radiation protection there that are involved, as we'll discuss later on. So it's very important that we understand that this is a very important document. Sometimes I tend to see our colleagues, saying, I mean, what's the big fuss about this thing? We can just write the name of the patient and the investigation and send them there so long it is done. But I'm hoping that from this presentation or from this audit, we can see that there is specific information which is important, and the failure to provide this information leads to a lot of unwanted situation, if at all I may put it like that. So in Zambia, undertaking radiological investigations are governed by the Ionizing Radiation Protection Act of 2011 of Zambia. I will not go so much into this because we may be familiar with this, that all matters to do with radiation in the country are governed by this act. And we know that the Radiation Protection Authority is the authority given this role to ensure that the rules and the regulations are followed. So therefore, to monitor the compliance of referring clinicians to the Ionizing Radiation Protection Act, periodical clinical audits must be conducted in the radiology department. So this is very important because you want to see that things are being followed. I don't want to preempt myself there. So what is a clinical audit? Sorry about that. An audit is basically an assessment of an activity measured against a gold standard. Okay. So maybe sometimes we may want to ask ourselves, what is a standard? A standard-based study is a measure of quality. You may also want to say it is a reference point. It could be a model, it could be an example, if you like. So it's an agreed reference point, an agreed level, by an authority. So this authority sets this standard. It is also a requirement. So sometimes you may think of it as a requirement, things that you expect in place, certain things that you expect to be done in a certain way. So it is a standard, it's a reference point. Okay. So this Bwalya and Wanga, they define a clinical audit as a quality improvement process that seeks to improve imaging standards, if we refer to imaging, through a systematic review of practice. Now, this, if you underline systematic review of practice, you will see what we mean by this as we go on. When we start looking at how do we actually do this audit. So the European Commission also and the International Atomic Energy Agency, they define a clinical audit as a systematic examination or review of radiological procedures, comparing it against an agreed standard and making changes in imaging practice to reach the chosen standard if necessary. So you will see that in this definition, there's the aspect of comparing it against an agreed standard, but they go further and they say making changes in imaging practice to reach the chosen standard, meaning that you don't end at just doing the assessment. No, you go further and there's need for changes to be made later on. There are also other actions that need to come in. So there is what is referred to as an audit cycle. So if one is to do an audit, then you need to follow what is referred to as an audit cycle. So like in our case, we are looking at 6 stages that have to be followed for you to complete the audit cycle. So the first one is you identify the problem and the aim of the audit. Okay. Later on, you'll see I'll amplify on this, and I'll refer to the process that we undertook to do our study, so that our audit rather, so that we familiarize ourselves with these stages and probably appreciate them better. So the second one is you establish the standard. I think we've already talked about the standard is very important because you need to know what's the reference point. Then if you are doing a clinical audit, then you are referring to this reference point. Say, oh, okay, this is the service being provided. How are we going to establish if this service is being done, is being provided correctly, for example? It means you compare to this standard which has been set. So the third stage is the data collection, and then the fourth, analyzing data, report writing, the fifth, implementing change, re-auditing as a sixth stage. So to dig into these stages, if we start with the first one and referring to the process that we went through in conducting our audit. So for us, in identifying the problem, I would have you know that we noticed that most of the request forms were that would reach our department were incompletely filled. So you find that certain information is missing, this information is missing, and there were very common areas that would, in most cases, be unfilled. So that for us was an eye opener. No, I think here there's something going on. So that for us culminated into identifying what the problem was. Okay. So now you realize that to improve delivery of imaging services, I think is deemed necessary. And for our case, general radiography is the only medical imaging service offered using ionizing radiation. And general radiation, as I think I've already mentioned, that it's not something to be taken lightly, and that's why there's even an act to govern its use, and there's an authority to ensure that the rules and the regulations are followed. Not only that, we are looking at the effects of ionizing radiation. Improper use of it, is should be strictly avoided. So when it comes to the aim of the audit, so after we identify that there's this problem, most of our request forms that are coming in, we find that they are incompletely filled in. So the aim of our audit in this case now was to appraise the adequacy of completion of general radiological request forms that the department was receiving. So we knew that there was a problem, but we wanted to establish how big is this problem in short. And that is what the last bullet there is trying to explain. So we've covered the first one. We've identified the problem. We've also established what the aim of our audit is. Very important. Then you move on now to the second one here. As I mentioned earlier, I think I spent a little bit of time explaining what a standard is. I'll not go there back, but I'll explain, say, for example, an example of PA standards. I think some of us that are in government, we know performance standards. So we'll find that when there's performance assessment, you have the standards by the side there. You're going to look at, oh, okay, for example, if it's a radiology department, okay, do you have a functional working X-ray unit? I think we know what you guys do, what goes on. Okay, do you have, for example, the system for carrying out manual processing, for example, as a standard? Do you have an automatic processor, and so on and so forth? Sometimes maybe you may even go a little bit further in terms of resources. Did you have adequate resources in this period under review and so forth? Performance standards. Standard operating procedures, these are basically standards because these are what is expected in terms of operation of a particular service area and so on and so forth. So in establishing the standard, actually, research also is very key because there are certain things maybe where there's no specifically known, maybe obvious standard in that area. But when you go through research, when you do literature review, you find that there are actually authorities that have developed standards in that area. So research plays a key role. So in our case, we agreed with the Royal College of Radiology and believe that all request forms should be filled 100% because information that is there is very important and it ensures that quality service is provided and ensures that you obviate certain things that you don't want to go into, by ensuring that the request form is completely filled in. So the data collection aspect, the third stage that we saw in that audit cycle. So when it comes to data collection here, you can do prospectively or retrospectively. You can say this is January, for example. You can say between June and whatever month we are going to collect this data. That's prospective because you are looking at the future aspect. But retrospectively, you may say, okay, we are going to go back into storage and look at the X-ray forms that we from the period whatever year behind, and then you analyze them and so on and so forth. So, like in our case, this is what we did. We did a retrospective one because it was easy for us to go into the storeroom. Okay, fine, let's look for the X-rays, look at forms within this period, and in our case, it was in January and December of the year 2020. And fortunately enough, we found them. So we were able to use those request forms for our study. So it's quicker, cheaper, easier. You just look for them and you do your study. So you can formulate a checklist. Like in our case, we looked at. By the way, what you're looking at on your right, that is actually a request form that is used at our hospital. So for us, you see, you can get those and use them as the variables. The date, the patient name, what's the number, all those, all that is very important information. So in our case, the medical imaging manager received all the available request forms from the archives, as I think I already mentioned, and this was assisted by 2 members from the QIC Quality Improvement Committee. I should make mention that initially this project was done under the Quality Improvement Committee at St. Francis Hospital. That's why you see me mentioning that they took part in the organizing of things as we retrieved the request forms and so on and so forth. So I should make mention that sometimes when you are carrying out some of these research or audit, one might be concerned that as you were doing your data collection or as you were doing your research, did you negatively impact on the activities of the department, or because our concern is service delivery, we don't want to disrupt the service delivery. So in our case, there was nothing of that sort. There was no interruption to service delivery and the workflow. So I just wanted to make mention in that area. So a total of 974 general request forms were collected and included in the audit process. Okay, so they were assessed for completeness and all the variables on the RIF. That was just the general. Once we were looking at the forms, you just say, okay, fine. For example, is it within this period that we are trying to review, and then you set them aside so that those that are from another maybe period are excluded. Okay. So now when it comes to step 4, analyzing the data and report writing. So here you can use different forms of analysis, analyzing this data. So in our case, we use the statistical package for social sciences, version 23. So when we got that, we created that checklist that we are talking of, considered all those variables, the date, the patient name, whether the signature is there, and so on and so forth, the sex, the clinical indication, the clinical history is the indication there, and so on and so forth. So 1 was assigned if that variable was filled in, and 2 if that variable was not filled in. So specific information from the SPSS, that is percentage of incomplete and complete RS, that is the radiological record forms, and the distribution of incomplete RS showing the percentage of the variable seldom filled in was generated. The way SPSS operates, you can generate this data just by a click of a button. You can actually say if you want percentage of this, and so on and so forth, and then you can create tables for better appreciation of this information. So the audit was written and presented to both the QIC, that is the Quality Improvement Committee, and the hospital management for improvement action. We are talking about analyzing the data and report writing. That's why I wanted to mention this information. So implementing the changes. I think you heard I mentioned to say there is no point in doing the assessment or evaluating if this service being provided is of quality, and then you don't present this information, because the information is meant to improve service delivery. So there is need to present this information so that it has an impact on the service delivery. Very important. In addition, in our case, the head clinical care issued a memo to the referring clinicians, emphasizing the significance of completing and correctly filling these forms. So the completion and correct filling of these forms, correct filling of these forms was included in the induction, was to be included, sorry, in the induction program for the new referring clinicians. Here, what we mean is, if as clinicians are coming, report for work at the hospital, as in first time reporting, this be it MLs, the clinic officers, the doctors, and so on and so forth. Here, our recommendation was that the filling in of request forms, and not only just request forms, but even other forms for the lab, we felt that there's need for this to be part of the orientation, that they should emphasize, the gentlemen and ladies, it's important that whichever document you have, please completely fill it in. So this was one of the recommendations that was made rather. So the other thing that was done is that the radiologists were also returning incomplete or incorrectly filled in forms for non-emergency cases. Okay, very clear, they're very important. Non-emergency cases via the portals and back to the clinician. So if a form comes in and we feel it's not completely filled in, information is missing, and we know that, okay, this case we were able to assess it, okay, fine, this case I think we can manage to wait for a short period so that this form is completely filled in, for the purpose of ensuring that the clinicians understand, no, I think we need this form to be completely filled in, and there's a reason for this. So we'll send these forms back, and then they'll come back completely filled in. And most of the clinicians were very appreciative of this. They said, this is a good reminder. Sorry, sometimes they would indicate, okay, sorry about this, and so on and so forth. So this was for the purpose of ensuring that we implement these things, and with the hope that we'll see that change will come in. So some of the forms also were returned after the patient. If it's an emergency, we know that we can do this investigation, but after it is done, we send back the form, or contact the clinician, say, this request form was incompletely filled in, and so on and so forth, and discuss and emphasize the need for them to be completely filled in. So the 60th stage is the re-auditing. Remember, I mentioned that there's no need in doing an audit if you don't implement it, if you don't, after recommendations are made, you don't implement those changes, and then there's need for re-auditing to establish whether change has come and whether there's improvement in that service delivery. So in our case, re-auditing was planned for the year ending 2022 to assess any improvement following the intervention strategies that I've already stated. So having gotten that out of the way, let's go into the actual audit so that we see what we did. So I would like to start by mentioning that, first of all, on a request form, you can actually categorize the information that is needed. So there's information relating to the patient identification, very important. Information relating to the examination, very important. And information relating to the referral. So if you look at the request form there, you'll find that this information actually, under 1 is scattered for under 1, 2, and 3. If you go to the second one, information relating to the examination, you'll see that it is scattered for under 4. 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay? Then if you look at information relating to the referral, you see that it's scattered for under 8 and 9, which is requesting physician or department, and the signature. Very important information. So the audit findings. Remember, I mentioned that we had analyzed a total of 974 request forms, and these they met the inclusion criteria by being from the period that was under review, and that is January to December 2020. So we'll see that the findings revealed that a total of 93 from the 974, representing a percentage of 9.5, were completely filled in. Okay. So from 974, only 93 were completely filled in. which left a number of 881, representing a percentage of 9.5%, and these were inadequate refugees. And we felt this was a very big number. If you look at the distribution as indicated on your right there, you will see the significance of this information. That 90.5 were incompletely filled in, and only 9.5% were completely filled in. So if we dig into the specifics there, now we want to look at the distribution of the incompletely filled in. So remember, I segregated that information and said there is information relating to the patient, information relating to the examination, information relating to the referral. Okay, so with regards to patient identification, from the findings, we see that only a number of about 4 of them, representing a percentage of 0.5%, were devoid of patient name. So now this means that these 4, there was no patient name. So this request just came fast. The other information is there, but there is no patient name. That's the implication of this one. Okay. Then we had 597, representing a percentage of 61.3% of the request forms. There was no hospital number. So this request, they come. There is no hospital number. The name is there. These are things are there, but there is no hospital number. So, and we see that this is the largest number in terms of request forms that were devoid of request needed information. Then 3 of them, representing a 0.4%, they did not have the age, these forms. And then last but not the least, about 2 of them did not have a gender. This is information which is very important, as we'll discuss later on. I think the table on your right basically shows this information. Then regarding the examination, because it's very important that that request form states what examination. So information is regarding the examination. Okay, so the requested examination. What is that examination that this clinician wants? Okay, then from there we're talking about what is the indication, the diagnosis. What are you trying to rule out here? Okay, the clinical history. Here we're looking at what has been happening to this patient. Very important information. So this information is indicated to help the radiographer or radiologist do their job. And the agency, should it be done immediately? Is there some room for it to maybe be delayed a bit so that you are sent to other emergencies and so on and so forth? This information is very important. So from the results there, we see that 3, representing a percentage of 0.5%, 0.4%, did not have the requested examination. So this form has this information, but the clinician has not indicated what examination he or she wants to be done. So then we also have 68, which represented a 7% did not have the indication. Okay, so there's no indication there. Then 449, representing a 46.2%. These forms did not have the clinical history. So we don't know what has been happening to this patient. We don't know whether this is a recent thing, whether it's a chronic thing. It's not even stated there. Then 336, representing a 7%, didn't indicate the level of urgency. So that is what we got with regards to information relating to this examination. Then regarding the referral, so here we are concerned about the ward. Okay, where is this patient coming from, so that we have an idea where this clinician is sitting. Okay, so if it's gyne, then we know, okay, this in gyne we expect that kind of condition. So if we see something out of the ordinary, then the question, are you really coming from this ward? Or, so this important information is very important. The referring clinician there, we expect that the name should be there. Okay, the department should be there. Here, mind you, ward and department, I'm sure you can see a difference there. Then the signature is very important. So from our findings, it was established that 133 of those request forms, representing 13.9%, did not have information related to the ward. We don't know where this patient has come from. Okay, so such that sometimes if you want to follow up, you may have difficulties in even establishing where should I go to follow up with the clinician in case of need, in case it's something you want to seek clarification on. 472, representing 48.5% of the request forms, did not have the referring department. Okay, 31 request forms, representing 3.2%, did not have the signature. All these are legal issues. So we had results in that, as indicated there, with regard to the referral. So now to discuss briefly, what do these results mean? Because sometimes you can just put up figures and so on and so forth, but it's important to understand. Okay, so an audit of the adequacy of completion of request forms relating to general radiography for the period of 12 months was done, as I indicated. So those guys state that request forms should meet a certain standard. Okay, for a request form should meet certain standards for it to effectively communicate what a clinician requires of the radiology department or medical imaging department. I think I mentioned this even as I started this presentation. So our study or our audit showed that 9.5% of the request forms were completely filled, only 9.5%. So Raul discovered that 73 in their study, Raul, or in his study, he discovered 73% of the RF were completely filled in. You see that difference. So when you compare with the literature, there were studies, like I just took this one to see that they found 73% of the requests were completely filled in, but for us only 9.5%. And we felt that this was quite remarkable, and we needed to really look at this and do something about it, because it has a very significant impact on the quality of service that we are providing. So contrary to the findings that were found by those guys, Yusuf and the group, and Abubakar and the group discovered that none of the request forms analyzed in their study were completely clear. Okay, so we're trying to look at a bit of literature there and compare with our study there. So incomplete request forms can result in delayed imaging, increased workload to radiographers. How? Sometimes you may find that a wrong examination is done and then it has to be redone, you know. So sometimes when you look at delayed imaging there, you are trying to establish the whole aspect here going on. Information is missing, so now you have to try and fill in the blanks so that you quickly attend to this patient. So there will be delayed imaging there. Okay. So we've talked about wrong imaging. If the information is incomplete, not adequately provided, you end up imaging the wrong patient. You know, there are certain instances where this patient, maybe by mistake, picked up a wrong request form and so on and so forth. And if on that request form, the patient's name is not put there and so on and so forth. So many of these irregularities may occur just because the request form has not been completely filled in. A wrong diagnostic report can be given, associated with wrong treatment, you know, increase the different dose to the patient because you may have to repeat these investigations. Okay. So it's very important that these forms are completely filled in to avoid these already indicated situations. So information relating to the patient identification. So the current study shows that 90%, our clinical audit, so that 90.5% of the request forms were incomplete. So some were devoid of information regarding patient identification, name, gender, and age. Okay. So now, according to Zafar and the colleagues, referring clinicians must provide adequate information to ensure that the right radiological procedure is done for the right patient. This can only be achieved if every information requested for there on that form is provided. Sometimes because the information is incomplete, you may end up doing this X-ray and you find that no, you've done a wrong X-ray, and you're supposed to, do the other one and so on and so forth. Radiation protection issues coming. Okay. So a study by these same guys, though with a focus on radiological research forms for CT, found comparable results, where 72.34% of their forms in their study were also devoid of complete information relating to patient identification. Just somewhat to compare with what we found. So information relating to the examination. Our audit revealed that 46% of the forms were devoid of clinical history. Findings in our studies showed that the clinical history was devoid in 20% and 99% of the request forms analyzed respectively. So here we're referring to those guys, Yusuf et al. And Zafar et al. Just to compare them. The current study revealed that the indication of provisional diagnosis was missing in 7% of our forms. While when we compare to Zafar et al., they reported 1.33% in this parameter. So the RRF radiological request form should provide information such as the clinical history, presenting complaints, and indication of provisional diagnosis to enable the radiographer or radiologist to appreciate the health status of the patient. I think I mentioned this earlier. It's very important because it helps you to do the appropriate examination. Also, when we are attending to these patients, we'll be able to, we have an appreciation of what they've been going through. So we'll be able to provide the needed service, quality service, as I've already mentioned. So also, if the right investigation is done, it will help the clinicians to arrive at a decision, a proper diagnosis. For us, it will help us to decide which examination can best be used to get this information that the clinician wants. This information is used to justify the exposure of the patient to ionizing radiation. So information relating to the referrer, very important information. I talked of the signature. The signature is very important because if the signature is not provided, then that document is not legally a valid document. So we see that in 3.2% of the request forms, this information was missing. Okay. Findings of the previous two studies also reported 9%. The other one reported 40.7% of the forms were devoid of clinical signature, respectively. So the referrer is required to sign on the form to validate the request. Okay, it's very important because if you just fill in without signing, okay, that makes that request not valid. Actually, you can even actually request that no, you need to append your signature on this one to make it valid. So it's very important that the documents are completed adequately and the clinician signs. Sometimes I know there's that pressure, so many patients and so forth, but this is something that needs to be done properly. And for your patient to get the service, good service, and for the right examination to be done on that patient, it's important that you take your time, fill in the form, and ensure that all the needed information is provided. Our audit found 0.5% of the forms were devoid of the name of the referrer, while previous 3 studies elsewhere reported 9%, 18%, 28.7% respectively. The name of the referrer and the referring department are important. Like I mentioned earlier, in cases where you want to follow up, make a follow-up, you want to really understand what's going on. There are certain instances where an investigation, maybe a special investigation has been requested for, but when you read the indication and probably the clinical history, these things are not matching. Okay, so sometimes we actually follow up to the where this patient is coming from and inquire to say, oh, this patient you requested for this. We are trying to establish or understand what is going on, or whether this investigation can actually be done, because this indication you put here does not qualify to be an indication for this particular type of investigation. So maybe there's something that is missing. Then you find that you discuss, oh no, I think this should be this. So that's why it's very important that that information is indicated. So there's another aspect that we need to briefly talk about, the issue of patients of childbearing age 12 to 55 years. So these are matters of radiation protection advocated for by even maybe before we even go to the International Atomic Energy Agency, even the Radiation Protection Authority. You'll find that these issues are very important and need to be considered. If you are attending to a patient that is within the childbearing age, they are still considered operations. So that's why it's very important that the age is indicated so that these things can be considered as the examination is being done. So this measure goes against exposing the fetus to ionizing radiation in case this patient is pregnant, you see. So this information is very important so that important measures are put in place. So one approach commonly used is the 28-day rule, which most of the radiographers are familiar with, radiologists are familiar with, I'm sure maybe even the clinicians are also familiar with it, which states that whenever possible, one should perform the radiological examination of the lower abdomen until within 28 day interval following the onset of menstruation. So to operationalize this rule, the medical, rather the clinician, should ask the patient so that they indicate on the form when the last menstrual period was, or when the last menstrual date for the last menstrual period, so that the radiographer or the radiologist is able to determine the possibility of pregnancy before proceeding with the examination. Because if she missed the period, then there will be issues like we need to establish if she's pregnant or not. Okay, was the pregnancy test done? If not, can we do an ultrasound before we do this investigation? In that line. However, the findings of the current study revealed, coming back to our audit, revealed that the forms used at our hospital do not have a provision for the last menstrual period to be indicated. If you remember the form that I showed you there, so we even made a recommendation that it's important that it's revised so that this information can be included there. So a study by Chanda et al. Also observed that they observed a gap with regard to last menstrual period component, which was missed in the RF used for the CT examinations at Cancer Diseases Hospital. So in conclusion, this audit revealed, I think, a significant gap, as we have seen, in the completion and adequate filling in of forms at our hospitals and hospitals. Remember, I mentioned 90.5% of the forms were incompletely filled in. So this picture is not unique, as many studies have shown these and they report similar findings where there's a significant gap as regards to filling in of forms by our clinicians. Now, this is very important to note because it has a very significant impact, like I said, on issues to do with radiation protection to our patients, the quality of service that we provide. It has an impact on the decision that the radiologist will make, the radiographer will make in terms of what investigation they will do, how they will do it. So sometimes you may request you want this investigation, but how it's done is dependent on the radiographer's interpretation of the request form, the information that you've provided there. You know, there are certain things that the clinician may not be aware of that the radiographer will take into consideration, or that the radiologist will take into consideration, even as they attend to this plan that has been referred to the imaging department. So radiological request forms, rather clinical audits involving other areas of imaging such as ultrasound, mammography, are encouraged because you will find that these inadequacies, they are not specific to request forms for X-ray and so on and so forth. So it is encouraged that they can be done also with other modalities and see if information is being adequately provided or not, and then so that the hospital can see what it can do to reduce that gap. In addition, a national audit can be conducted in Zambia with the aim of standardization of request forms and the inclusion of all pertinent missing requirements, including the date for last menstrual period. So the recommendation that we made following the clinical audit was that the hospital medical imaging department hold meetings with the various clinicians to explain the importance of fully completing these forms. This we did. We presented our findings during the clinical meeting where we, explained, we adequately explained things, and it was a wonderful discussion where we had an interaction with the clinicians, to discuss issues pertaining to the need for completely filling these forms. So we also said filling in of request forms should be included in the induction, like I mentioned, a program for all new clinicians, training clinicians on practical training, or those that are on attachment. So then also the hospital management issue an official communique to all referring clinicians, emphasizing the significance of completing these forms. This was done. And then St. Francis Hospital to management to establish an efficient, amicable mode of addressing inadequately or inappropriately completed forms without inconveniencing the client. So here we're talking about how do we handle this issue without, for example, sending the patient back, without delaying the investigation. Okay, so this is coming up with a modality on how we can, if we see that forms are not being completed, how do we handle this issue so that the service delivery is not affected. Okay, so then the forms to be periodically reviewed to promote inclusion of all the data vital to the intended medical imaging examination. So these were some of the recommendations that we made. I think that's where I end. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bwalya, for this well-outlined presentation. This is a very good presentation. I might also add and say our colleagues from the lab did a similar presentation at the QI Zambia, that is Quality Improvement Zambia conference last year. They did a presentation on completion of requests for the lab. And I believe this presentation can also make it to at national level through the QI Zambia. So thank you once more. Actually, standards under QI Zambia says that if a radiographer or a lab personnel has the right to turn back the request form if not fully completed or filled in. And actually some other countries, especially North Africa, Egypt, and other countries, request forms, someone who's requesting supposed to put their full names, you put your profession, if you are a physiotherapist, if you are a medical doctor, if you're a clinician, you write there, as well as your license number. So it's one thing we can work out for standards when we are reviewing some of these things. So at this point in time, I'll invite questions, contributions, and deliberations. Thank you. Any questions? Contributions? Okay, thank you. You can go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Akomi Chingizia. I'm a physiotherapist from Kamoto Mission Hospital. I must say it was a nice presentation, although I joined in, I think, after it had already started. So maybe I don't know whether it's a question contribution, but I think it's more of a question. Reading through the data collection that you got, I think you have mentioned to say 9.5%. Is it 9.5% of the forms that were given out were completed? So meaning that the rest of the forms were not completed. I just want to find out if we have also taken keen interest, as in to find out factors that could have caused probably the incomplete completion of the work of the forms by the clinicians. And in the future, do you have any plans of how you can probably revise the form into which you can make it suitable for clinicians to easily complete the forms? Because I understand probably one of the factors that could have been the contributing factor is that probably, these clinicians, they get to be overwhelmed. And you see, if you give them a very big form, take for instance, a form that has a lot of information, just for you to get information that can be put on other documents, take for instance, the demographic data, which is the name of the patient, which can be found on other papers, may seem to be irrelevant. So I just want to find out if we have also put into consideration to say, have Are there any factors that we think we can try to eliminate that has made clinicians not to complete the forms? And then on the part of the discussions there, I saw something like there was a discussion which mentioned one of the researchers that for them, they found out that 73 point something percent of the total forms were filled according to their research. This should be 73 point something percent of their total forms were filled. Now, in our case scenario, because we would want to use the same forms nationwide, we want this form to be implemented everywhere. So did we also try to look at the factors that made those research, the same researcher that had a very good number of people that completed the form, what factors do we think made them to have such kind of a very good number, which is 73? And also, are there any way that we can revise our form to theirs or make it close to theirs so that it will be easy for clinicians also to fill in the forms? Thank you very much. I hope I was short.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I think Mr. Bwalya can go ahead and respond to that.
Okay, thank you so much. I hope I will remember. Your question actually was not as short as it's a bit long, but I want to make mention that for us, our study showed that 90.5% of the request forms were incompletely filled in. So as opposed to 9.5% that were completely filled in. So that's the difference there. So you have a very big gap there. Okay. So now, if I remember correctly, your question was, what are the factors that we established maybe that are contributing to clinicians failing to complete this form? So some of the comments that we got were, sometimes there's a lot of work, as in a lot of patients, very little time to, complete the form. Sometimes they would probably maybe just want to look at the key, what they would consider to be key information. And then sometimes, like for example, when it comes to the hospital number, they will say, no, the patient doesn't got the hospital number, for example. So we tried to address those issues. You see, when you are requesting for an investigation, it's a serious issue. The reason why you are requesting for it is because you are interested in it and you want it to be done properly. You want the person at the other end to get what you are seeing. Because when you are with your patient, you are just alone there with your patient. The radiographer or the radiologist is not there. So that's why that communication, the request form, has to be completely filled in. The parameters that have been put there are all important. There is nothing which is not important on that form. That's why you have seen, I've gone back to this image so that I show you. You mentioned that maybe the form is too long, maybe it's too big. Actually, this form is one of probably the most simplified forms